Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Hi, and welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle.
How's your week been, Kyle? That's an exciting new background you've got going on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for noticing. I've been getting a lot of flack from some of our viewers about my lack of a background, especially when compared to yours and all of your movie posters. So I felt like I needed to up my game a little bit here.
For all of our listeners and not viewers, I have a number of movie posters in the background that I collected from my years of working in film. And up until today, Kyle has had a plain white wall in the background. So he's finally upping his game and getting his design ass in gear.
That's right. But also still letting my kind of nerd flag fly a little bit back there.
That's okay. At least it doesn't look like you've got Godzilla coming out of the top of your head, which is what one of my posters makes me look like I've got. So,
Jess, it's fire. Get it?
It quite literally is fire because the image is of Godzilla surrounded by fire. So that's what it is. So hopefully this is just driving everyone to our YouTube channel.
There we go.
Which
nice tie-in.
I know. See, I know how to segue. That's exactly what we wanted to talk about because we are all over socials now. We are on TikTok. We are on Instagram. We are on YouTube. We are getting with the times. And we are at early_adopter, and remember, no E in the adopter on all those platforms. So come follow us. We'll be adding all sorts of new social content over the next couple of weeks. So join us there.
Very exciting.
Very exciting.
Well, last week we covered the theory behind AI agents and our ladder of autonomy, what these different types of automations actually are and how they differ. But today, as we promised last time, we're going to go full practical mode. We're talking, real use cases, real results, and, some ROI numbers and some impact.
Exactly. So before we dive into our real world examples, though, let's do a super quick refresher on what we covered last week. So Kyle, do you want to walk us through the ladder of autonomy again?
Absolutely. Think of an automation as a ladder with 4 rungs, each one adding more independence and decision-making capability. At the bottom, you've got basic workflows. These are just if this, then that. No thinking, just executing a fixed recipe.
So like when someone places an order and then they automatically get sent a tracking number, right? So it's like pure automation, no intelligence required.
Exactly. And we've been doing that for a long time. There's lots of tools out there that help you with it. And for the most part, still today, that's quite relevant and useful. But rung 2 is task agents. These can handle single tasks with some intelligence. So instead of just sending that tracking number, as Jess mentioned, you have the agent might read a customer email, understand what they're asking about, in this instance, shipping, and then respond with the relevant tracking info, plus an estimated delivery time, something that's a little bit more customized and personal to that person.
So it's adding context and understanding, but it's still just handling one specific task at a time.
Right. And then going up that ladder further, you get rung 3, where this starts to get interesting now. So the AI agent starts to be a goal-seeking agent. These can handle multi-step processes and make decisions within the boundaries that you set. So that same customer service agent might read a complaint, check the customer's history, understand your refund policy, and decide whether to issue a refund or offer store credit or escalate it then further to a human.
So it's like having an employee who can think through a whole process and then make judgment calls, but only within the very strict rules that you've given it.
Yeah, I think we used a great example last week with the dog running around the fence. It's still, you've still set up the fence, but it's doing a lot inside of that, within your rules.
Love that example.
So then now we go further up that ladder to the last rung, which is the agentic AI. And that's when the system starts setting its own goals, making strategic decisions. It might notice patterns in refund requests and proactively suggest changing your return policy, or identifying product quality issues and creating a task in your project management system before they become bigger problems.
So to recap for our listeners, workflows follow scripts, task agents handle single jobs intelligently, AI agents execute complex processes within rules, and then agentic AI basically becomes a really strategic colleague. So most businesses, and a lot of the examples that we'll give today, will live really comfortably within rungs 2 and 3. It's not super common that you'll either come across the full definition of agentic AI or even a need for agentic AI.
And I think still, a lot of businesses or tools that are out there talking about agentic AI are still a little far off. So we're just not quite at that stage yet. We're getting there, and it's the level of innovation in that space is happening very quickly, but definitely still a lot to be done. But going back to our infinite intern analogy, traditional automation is like having a very basic assistant who follows scripts. AI agents, on the other hand, are like having interns or that are more like senior employees who can handle increasingly complex work, but still very much within their role or function. Agentic AI, that last rung in the ladder, is having a business partner who's actively working to improve and evolve your entire organization.
And here's what really matters for our audience. You don't really need to climb to the top of the ladder to start to see an ROI. The sweet spot is usually that second or third rung. It's a reliable agent that handles complex tasks within clear boundaries, faster or cheaper than humans, obviously with human oversight, but really it's just to save time. That's kind of one of the really key things is how can this agent help you take back some of your time?
Right. And we love a good framework.
Sure do.
It's our prompt engineering frameworks, etc. So I think we want to give you all a framework as well of when to use an AI agent. You can start to dive in and think about, well, when should I actually identify what I'm doing and apply that to my business? So we're going to walk you through kind of the thinking process we use to identify what should become an agent versus what can stay or what can just be a basic automation. Not every repetitive task needs an AI agent. Some things are going to be better as workflows, or some things should stay completely manual. And we'll kind of talk about what that is. But as Jess is talking about, that sweet spot for agents is kind of in that second and third rung, which is something that requires judgment, perhaps some personalization. And then, of course, we always talk about context, giving it some of that context to provide either personalized or, some specificity. And then, it happens frequently enough that you're eating your time. This is not something that you're doing once a quarter or once a month.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important distinction. I think a lot of people hear AI agent at the minute because the definition is still a little fuzzy and people are still a little unclear. These have only been around for really, 5 or 6 months in the public imagination. And they immediately think that they need an agent for everything or they need to automate everything. And that's not actually the case. And hopefully this framework will help you identify what might need an agent, what might just need a workflow, what might just need an automation, really kind of refining that thinking.
It's a good way to waste a lot of time and money trying to chase after some of these agents.
Absolutely, yes.
We hear all this hype out in the world about how people are cutting 20% of their workforce, enhancing their productivity. And so I think we get lost a little bit in chasing after this. So hopefully this framework can help you identify some of the things that really are good for automation versus, just chasing after like that next,
Exactly. Cutting through the hype, Kyle. We're cutting through
That's right. That's right. So step one, find your time sinks with intelligence requirements. We start by tracking what we're doing for a week and asking questions about these repetitive tasks. So some questions to ask. First, does this take me more than 15 minutes each time I do it? Second, do I have to make decisions or judgments during the process? Is this an email that's important enough to act on? Or what's the right tone for this follow-up? If I'm kind of thinking through all of these things, that personalization component of the agent becomes useful. And then lastly, ask yourself, am I doing some version of this task, maybe more than 5 times a week? Or, in some of the examples we'll use, maybe it's 5 or more times a day. If you can answer yes to any of these 3, I think it's a good candidate for an agent. If it's just repetitive clicking with no thinking required, that's probably just a basic automation. So whereas if it requires some deep thinking, or maybe there's complex relationship dynamics, we go back to Erin, who was kind of working through how she responded to difficult vendors. That might stay manual, but you're using AI to help you write it, but it's probably not an AI agent workflow.
Absolutely. So that middle question about judgment is key. That's really what separates the agents from regular automation workflows.
And I think that's where most people get tripped up. They try to automate things that don't require intelligence, or they avoid automating things that do. So step 2 of our framework, identify the human touch elements. And this is crucial. What makes my manual version good? So for email processing, I'm not just sorting messages, I'm understanding the context and the urgency. For follow-ups, I'm not just sending templated responses, I'm choosing relevant content based on what I know about the person or the company. And then for research, I'm not just gathering facts, I'm connecting dots and identifying what actually matters for the conversation. So the agent needs to replicate a lot of these judgment calls, not just the mechanical automated steps. And that's why we need AI, to maintain the quality and personalization while at the same time handling the volume.
And this is where that prompt engineering conversation we had a couple of episodes ago becomes really critical, right?
Absolutely. You're training the AI not just to follow a script. Step 3 of the framework, calculate the real cost. So that could be both the opportunity cost and the time saved. And a lot of the examples we're going to talk about, there's a real amount of time that we're spending daily, which not only do you think about the time that you're saving in that day, but also the opportunity cost of what you can be doing separately, or the interruptions in your time. I'm going to talk about some sales research tools, and it's not just about the time, it's also about the confidence that I get when I properly prepare for that meeting using some of these AI agents.
I really love that way of thinking about it. And it's a really good point about, the context switching costs. Like, most people don't factor in how disruptive some of these interruptions can be to their deep work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even getting distracted by an email when you're in the middle of a flow
Mm-hmm.
state, shall we say, that can be super disruptive. And then you end up getting distracted by emails rather than continuing on with what you were doing. So it's an important thing to flag.
I think we all get a little annoyed or distracted when you hear that Slack, sound.
Yep.
That obviously there's lots of jokes about the Teams meeting call.
Oh.
All of those, even getting an email from Gmail or whatever your email tool is. All of those things, are now in our brain that distract us and keep us from maybe some of the more strategic work that we're doing. So there's a lot of opportunity cost that comes with some of these things.
It's like a Pavlovian response now, where you hear that Slack ping and you start twitching.
Exactly. I definitely feel that way about that, the Teams call or the Zoom call.
I'm hearing it in my head right now.
Oh, I know. So going back to the framework, step 4, design for feels like me, but faster. And this is the absolute art of agent building. The goal isn't to sound robotic or obviously automated. The goal is to sound like me on my best day, when I have unlimited time and energy, when I have capacity, and I'm not getting distracted by all of those sounds and pings from other tools. You achieve this by training the AI on successful examples. If you feed it your emails that get great responses, if you feed it things that are energetic, not just kind of generic best practices, the agent is going to learn patterns and really start to be that best version of yourself.
So this is like creating a custom GPT, which is what, we've talked about a couple episodes ago, but it's for your specific workflows, right? Like, it's very specific examples.
Again, going back to the context I'm giving it, what is kind of the best versions of my writing. And it takes time to get right. You're essentially teaching the AI your decision-making process, which brings in step 5, build in learning loops. So the best agents get better over time. You want to track what works. So if I'm talking about email summaries, what helps me make faster decisions? Which follow-up content gets the best engagement? Which research leads to the most productive conversations? And then you want to feed those patterns back into the agent's instructions, back into your prompts. I think this is what also separates agents from basic automation. A workflow is going to do the same thing forever, and it's going to stay consistent, but it's going to stay fixed. An agent evolves based on the feedback and the additional information and context you give it.
And so that's starting to get into the agentic territory that we talked about last week. So systems that can improve themselves over time. So this is probably more on rung 3/4 on the ladder rather than more towards the basic automations.
That's why I love the ladder analogy, because everything that we do, the more complex and the more we build it and evolve it over time, the farther it starts to creep up that ladder. So again, when we talk about AI agents versus agentic, they're not these totally different things. They really are an evolution that we're all working towards, but you got to start with the basics, understand the differences between them. And to your point, I'm still maintaining oversight on what I'm building. So I'm going to suggest improvements and evolve it over time, but ultimately I'm giving it the changes to implement, and it's still staying within kind of like my little fence.
Your invisible dog. Right?
Right.
But I think, using this framework's really important, because actually this week, Gartner, which is a business and tech research company, I don't know if anyone has ever heard of it. You may have heard of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which is...
Love a Magic Quadrant.
Everyone,
Love
love a Magic Quadrant. But they just released a study that predicts over 40% of agentic AI projects will be canceled by the end of 2027 due to escalating costs, unclear business value, and inadequate risk control. And I think a lot of that comes down to people not having a framework for deciding what actually becomes an agent. So they're kind of just jumping in because of the hype, because they feel like they should, or they're being told that they should, when actually they haven't taken that step back and looked at the framework.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Gartner points to in that is that most of these projects, the ones that are going to get canceled, are early stage experiments driven by hype and often misapplied. So they're not actually identifying the real pain point and the use case. And then their follow-up is to say, organizations need to make careful strategic decisions about where to apply the technology, which makes a lot of sense. If you just jump on the bandwagon and, if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur and saying, we need AI agents, and creating a directive to say, go build an AI agent, and you're not actually identifying the pain point, this is classic, product exercise. You have to identify the pain point and the solution that's going to be best fit for it.
And, this is where the framework really becomes crucial, because you just start to answer some of these questions for yourself and really start to figure out whether or not an agent is a useful exercise. It could be that just a simple automation is all you need, and throwing an agent at it is going to be a waste of time, a waste of money. And as they say in the study, it's just going to get abandoned because no one's using it, everyone hates it, etc. You need to really follow the framework and figure out whether it's worth the effort. And so the framework just then really helps avoid this kind of agent washing phrase, which is something that Gartner mentions, where vendors rebrand basic automations as AI agents. So if you understand the difference on the ladder, if you understand the difference between rungs 2, 3, and 4, you're not necessarily going to be as taken in by some of these agentic capabilities, or building overly complex solutions for really simple problems.
It has to go back to the business impact. I'm not building agents to be clever or because the technology is cool. I mean, sometimes I am, on side projects, and we'll talk about that with the Fun-Gent example.
Fun-Gents, we'll talk about Fun-Gents shortly.
Yeah, but in your business, you really need to focus on a clear ROI calculation. The ones we're going to go through, they all help you to, save time, unlock opportunity, and, really try to, impact your business in a positive way.
Yeah. And all of the things that you're talking about, that's measurable, which is important for justifying the time and investment in building these systems.
Which brings up a perfect point, which I think is just as important. When not to build agents. We've kind of touched on that in terms of the automation. If the task requires genuine creativity or it's very sensitive from a relationship perspective, I would keep that manual. If it happens less than once a week, it's also probably not worth automating. If you're going to spend a bunch of time trying to automate this task that doesn't really happen that often, you're probably not utilizing your time, in the best way. And the consequences of getting some of these AI agents wrong is pretty severe. If it's crisis management or legal communications, you probably want to maintain human control on that. So the goal isn't to automate everything. It's really to automate the time-consuming, but somewhat intellectually straightforward stuff, if you will. So you can focus on the work that actually requires the human judgment, relationship building, and maybe even some of those creative tasks.
So I just think that that's a really good way of thinking about the risk versus reward when it comes to choosing an AI agent or an automation or a workflow or agentic if you're getting really advanced up and climbing that ladder.
In the new world, this kind of post-AI world, what is going to be so important is more of the human interaction. So you want to automate your way to more human connection and interaction, not less.
Love that.
We're going to give some use cases here on things that we've done and we think could be useful and impactful to your business. But before you decide on what agent to build, spend 1 week tracking your time and noting all of the tasks that require both repetitive work, but also small decisions and maybe personalization. Ask yourself, if I had an assistant who understood my business perfectly, what would I delegate to them first? That's a perfect first agent to build.
And don't try to build everything at once. Start with one, get it working well, iterate it over time. As you use it, you will figure out new uses for it. I've got a good example of that coming up for one that I built where I started with thinking it just needed one thing and then I, changed it over time. And then you can move on to the next, but, don't try to do everything at once because you can never do everything at once.
Okay, so we've teased now all of these use cases. We've been talking about it forever. Let's finally dig into one of these.
Do it. What are some real use cases for using AI agents that we have encountered?
Okay, we keep talking about email. So let's go through an email assistant. Maybe you can get some of your sanity back and be a little less distracted. And I know you've built something similar to this, Jess, so you can probably relate.
Email overwhelm is real. We've all come back from holiday with 10,000 emails. So let's try and avoid that.
Yeah. And I think we all have similar problems. We spend a lot of time throughout the day processing emails. And then throughout the day, you try to remember follow-ups. And some things are multi-day tasks. We end up just creating lists upon lists, right, to keep track. But the real killer is, every time I stop working to check email, it takes you 15 to 20 minutes to get back into deep focus, as we kind of have talked about. So you lose afternoons, you lose your mornings to email management. And I think, what's expensive about this is you're having to understand the context across email threads. So it takes you quite a bit of time to come back to an email. You might have to identify hidden items buried in conversations, or maybe something in an email thread goes back to a transcript from a meeting that you had with this person. So that's where I think the email assistant really helped. This is where intelligence works because you're not just doing mechanical processing. So the agent that we built, it starts with watching my Gmail for anything that I label as an executive assistant. So I set up filters to automatically label emails from clients, vendors, or people that I task as important. When an email comes in, the agent reads the entire email thread, sometimes going back weeks, right? And creates a 2 to 3 sentence summary that captures essential context, relationships, and potentially action items. So I remember, what I was supposed to do or what I've done. The smart part is it just identifies those action items and deadlines even when they're implied. So if a client says we should probably discuss the timeline soon, the agent flags that as an action item to schedule a timeline review meeting. And then it'll create a task for me, and then it'll properly categorize that project and give it priority levels based on the sender and the timeline and the due dates and everything that would kind of factor into my response time.
I might have to ask you to build this for me as well.
Yeah, and I know we use slightly different tools. I built this one in a tool that I like called Make. It's one of my first agents that I've built. And as we talked about before with our framework, it's always evolving. It started out very simple. It started out with just a Gmail trigger based on my label. And then it kind of worked into, looking at the email content. So I would send that to, ChatGPT with a prompt like, read this email thread and extract a summary, action items with clear owners, deadlines, and then also the priority level based on urgency and sender importance. So again, this is where it's reading the context. It's doing a little bit more of that intelligence. There's no way an automation would be able to identify this information. And then beyond that, then when I started to evolve it after just kind of that summary piece, then I started to actually parse the response and create tasks. And then the last bit that I recently started doing is, even though we hate Slack notifications, it does send me a Slack
They're a
notification.
necessary evil, unfortunately.
They really are, right? So then I have now a channel that handles kind of the tasks that are important, handles every email, gives me the summary, and then kind of categorizes it by priority. So urgent items get immediate alerts. Everything else kind of gets buried into my morning and afternoon digest. So the workflow really didn't take me that long to build initially. I've been evolving it over time with more context, feeding it data to say oh, this is what's priority and this what isn't.
So what type of time savings are we talking about here?
I think this is where it gets really interesting for our audience. If you think about your specific email habits, if you're like most of us, you probably spend, an hour, 2 hours throughout the day processing emails. This agent realistically could reduce that down to just 15 and 20 minutes of reviewing summaries and outputs. So you're getting a significant amount of time back every single day. And I think throughout the week, you look at that now, it's okay, an hour and a half per day, 5 to 7 hours per week. You're talking, hundreds of hours throughout the year that you're unlocking. So that's the definite time savings. But then the multiplier effect is those recovered hours enable you to take on more client work, focus on more strategic thinking, growth initiatives. So there's a whole opportunity cost in that time that you're now getting back. So I think it's really important to focus on what you achieve out of that time saving.
But also, what about accuracy? And, what happens when things go wrong? Because obviously that's always a concern. We're always talking about human oversight. How do you manage that side of things?
And that is the biggest concern, and probably for myself and for a lot of us, our hesitation into starting this, because you don't want to have it do something that's wrong, create a task that isn't real and something like that. So that's why initially I started very simple. I started with the notifications and the summaries early on, and I really spent a lot of time working through the examples. And if I got something that didn't work well, I went back and changed my prompts and changed the workflows to help this process along. So I think the key insight for anyone that's trying to build it is not to be perfect. You want this to be good enough that you can handle 90% of the work while you focus on the other exceptions, those edge cases.
Love that. I think this is a great example. And as you say, anyone would be thrilled to not have to be dealing with emails all day long. Okay, so let me give you a real world example from my own work that kind of started off as an automation and then grew into an agent over time, which I think probably follows this framework as well. So I compile a weekly newsletter for my day-to-day job that looks at stories in the media and entertainment space and then kind of looks at it in terms of why they matter from an industry perspective. And, we tend to do about 5 to 7 stories each week for the newsletter. But really we're adding in, I don't know, probably 20 to 30 plus stories every week into my industry news Slack channel. So every time I find something that I think is useful or that I just kind of want to keep track of, I'll drop it into Slack. And then I sift through it on a weekly basis to find the stories that I want to highlight. And so originally I was dropping everything into Slack, and then I was copying and pasting the links into Airtable, which is my project management tool of choice. And I was copying and pasting the link. I was copying and pasting the headline, the author, the date of publication. I would try and do a little couple of line summary. And it was really time consuming to do, because when you add that up by, 20 or 30
Mhm.
articles at a time, it just becomes an absolute beast. So what I ended up doing was, originally I built an automation that linked from Slack to Airtable. If you've ever dealt with either of those tools, you know that they work pretty nicely together, which is obviously helpful. And originally, I used the automation to just extract the URL. And it was fine, but
Mhm.
sometimes the code would break and sometimes it wasn't ideal. So what I ended up building was an agent that that kind of was able to extract everything that I needed, and it started to be able to make decisions about what to extract and how to format it. So the agent has to read the HTML content, so it has to read the article. It has to figure out if it's a news article and it's coming from,
Mhm.
an industry publication, or if it's coming from a LinkedIn post. It then has to decide what the article headline is versus whether it's just,
Mhm.
navigation text, or it's an ad, or whatever it is. It's got to identify the publication date from various formats. Date formats are always quite tricky to to do if you're working in the computer space. It's got to determine.
Let's not get into the international
Oh
versus
my God, I
U.S.
can't even.
version of
Honestly,
dates.
that's a nightmare. But it actually has to work around that as well. And using the agent versus using the automation has actually made that much easier to
Hmm.
do, because it can change that,
Yep.
on the fly. It needs to determine the source publication name. And then, actually, this is really key. And this is one thing that I had to develop over time. It has to identify if there's a paywall, and you have to have really specific instructions for how to deal with the paywall, because some websites have very strict paywalls that, an AI can't get around. Some of them have paywalls that an AI can get around, and some of them don't have paywalls at all. Um, so that's where having the agents suddenly made it
Hmm.
so much easier. So the AI is making judgment calls about the context quality and the structure. And, it's really kind of an ideal example of that jump from rung 2, which is just
Hmm.
the automation, versus to rung 3, which is actually using the agent to make decisions, and it's executing a much more complex process of decision making within the, very strict
Hmm.
boundaries that I set. And, it's handling the edge cases really well. And, I have to get a little, I had to get a little creative when I was actually building it, but it honestly has saved me about an hour, 2 hours every week, because I'm not having to do that manual copying and pasting, which, as everyone knows, is the most tedious, boring thing on the face of the earth. So now all I have to do is look at my Airtable database, and I can decide which articles I think
Yeah.
are worth focusing on, without having to spend all the time kind of filtering through the excess, let's say.
Yeah, I love that example because one, it shows how you evolved the process. You started with your automation, and then as you came up against like technical challenges, whether it's the date, the paywall, the context, etc., then now you built the agent to solve a lot of those problems because it needed kind of that intelligence to handle the little parts that would trip you up. I also really think it's great because it shows the difference between following rules and understanding context, right? Again, going back to your date example, a workflow says extract the first date you find, right, which may not be useful. An agent says analyze the piece of content, determine what the actual publication date, and then start to do additional components. So it's really using that intelligence piece where the automation would not be able to.
Absolutely. So and honestly, that it has made my life so much easier. It seems like such a small thing, but this is the perfect example
Mm-hmm.
of something that was annoying. I hated doing it, and
Mm-hmm.
it was time consuming. And now I just don't need to worry about it. I can just look at it once a week and determine from there. And then I just dump what I need in Slack, and the automation or the workflow takes care of the rest. It's great. That was one of the best things I've ever built, actually.
Love that. Love that. All right, now I'm going to go into my second example, which is this agent is a little bit more complex, but I think what shows what's possible when you automate an entire business process. So this one is a kind of full sales pipeline agent. It handles everything from initial lead contact through to fully preparing for a sales conversation.
So it's not just a meeting prep. Like, this starts way earlier in the process, right?
Exactly. It starts really at the initial lead gen step. So, most businesses generate leads online. So whether that's through a contact form or downloading a white paper or just asking for an inquiry on your site, the agent starts at that process when a person expresses interest. Most businesses face a challenge around response time. A lot of studies show that the faster you respond to that lead, the more likely that you're actually going to convert them into a meeting, right? So, but, especially this group, we're time constrained. We don't have the bandwidth. So we're juggling a lot of different tasks. Some of those leads can sit for hours or days before getting attention. The agent eliminates that delay entirely. So this is a really great use case. So what does the agent actually do? As soon as someone fills out, a contact form or expresses that interest, the agent springs into action and starts this sales process. Phase one, lead qualification. So we need to make sure that it's actually an inquiry that we want to respond to. We get a lot of, fake service requests or partner things that we don't want to actually talk about. This allows you to put in your ideal customer profile and make sure that the right person. After you qualify that person, now it's going to send a personalized response based on what they filled in, a form, downloaded a white paper, etc. Then phase two is all about the intelligent booking coordination. So you want to send them scheduling links with time options. If you rely on sales conversations and you're not product led, then this could really improve your booking rates because it feels like there's someone on the other end of this email having a conversation with that person. The phase three, I think, is really, really impactful. And this is one that's probably helped me out the most when I think about this process, is that research and preparation phase. So what the agent is going to go out and do is it gathers intelligence about the person and the company. It goes and looks at their LinkedIn, does a little bit of research around the company, their size, what they do, and then looks at that relative to the pain point that you solve and gives you like a little bit of a brief before you walk into your conversation. For me, I kind of stop at the research bit just because I just want to walk into that meeting being as prepared and have as much detailed information as I need. And I know we get hit up with those AI, SDRs all the time. Those are very complicated workflows with a lot of different steps. This one's a little bit more basic, but it's really helpful to me to schedule the meeting and prepare research.
But I also think, as we've talked about, as we will talk about, sometimes it's better to keep it simple because there's fewer, ways for it to go horribly, horribly wrong. And I think some of those overly complicated workflows is where things tend to go a little bit wrong.
And the key is building it incrementally. So start with the really basic automation, and then then you can start to build on the contact and company research that builds you a brief and provides it to you for your meeting notes.
What kind of business impact can you expect from something like this? Because obviously at the end of the day, that's the most important thing.
If you think about your sales process, faster response times, consistent follow-up, and meeting prep, is massive. That's a way to really 10x, 20x your conversion rates. So for response time, it helps you get a lot faster to that person, which is going to increase your ability to book a meeting. For follow-up consistency, having a personalized touch point is definitely going to help for also booking as well as, eventually having that sales convert. And then for meeting preparation, if you walk into a sales conversation with deep knowledge about the prospect's challenges, you're going to see a much higher close rate and you're going to have a much more consistent conversation, as well as you might skip having a couple meetings. So rather than having a discovery and then having an assessment call and all of these different steps, you may pack all of that into one and really get quickly to what is that client's pain point. So it's a huge time savings.
Everyone loves being able to avoid extra meetings. Like, talk about a time saver right there.
Preaching to the choir on that one. The important bit here is, also going back to evolving it over time, keep giving it more data about your successful interactions and the kind of specific data about their business. That's going to make this whole agent much more successful. And then lastly, just getting started. I know this seems like very complex, but the beautiful thing about both of the agents I've spoken to about and the ones that Jess is talking about is they can be built incrementally in tools like Make, Zapier, N8N. So you don't have to be very technical. You just need to, go back to our framework, identify your manual processes and break it down into steps.
And a lot of the tools that you probably use already, like Airtable or Slack or any of these CRM tools, whatever the case may be, a lot of them will have automation or AI features built in
Mhm.
nowadays anyway. So you can just look to maybe automating something that you're already doing within one of those existing tools. You don't need to overcomplicate it by doing a big manual build. You can just take advantage of the
Mhm.
existing tools that you have.
And to add on to that as well, a lot of the tools that we're talking about that are, AI agent tools to help you build those workflows have integrations into the things you're using in your everyday
Absolutely.
business.
Yeah.
So I talked about a Gmail integration, a Slack integration, ClickUp integration. All of those things are native to most of these platforms.
100%. Right. Let's get down and dirty. Let's talk Fun-Gents. Um, when we were discussing this episode the other day, we came up with the term Fun-Gent. We completely pulled it out of thin air. It's not a fungus. It's an agent that you're working on for fun. We're trademarking it here and now. It's a Fun-Gent, not built for business purposes. So the stakes are super low, but it's a really cool glimpse kind of into the thought process about building an agent. So Kyle, why don't you walk us through this one? Because this is one that you're building for a friend of yours.
Yeah, this one's perfect because it shows how agent thinking applies beyond obvious business cases. But I think we're going to bring it back around. This is based on my friend Rajiv, so shout out Raj. He sent me a request. How do I book early morning golf tee times at his local course? And again, you might think this isn't business relevant, but I do think the principles here apply to really any time sensitive opportunity coordination. And so we'll try to make this relevant, but I think I love this one because it's super fun.
I just think it's really low stakes, but if an agent messes up, no one's going to lose a client or miss a big deal or whatever. But it's a great way of dipping your toe into the world
Mm-hmm.
of agents. So I think it's a great example.
And it's a great learning project. So here's Rajiv's problem. He's spending a lot of time on golf logistics. Now, for all of our friends, we know Rajiv loves logistics, but still, he's spending a lot of time on it, and he probably has some more important things to be doing than checking the booking system multiple times, then having to coordinate with friends, which we all know how much of a nightmare it can be trying to coordinate with people to see who can play. Exactly. And here's the kind of intelligence part, why this isn't just an automation. This is actually, a good use case for an agent. He's not just looking for any tee time, right? He needs to evaluate, is this, before a specific time when he wants to play? Is it under a specific price? This also sits behind a paywall because he's a member, of this booking tool. Are there enough spots for the people that want to join? Also who's available and who agrees to go. And then also, does his schedule allow it? So it needs to check like his own calendar to make sure that some of these booking times work for him. So it requires a lot of judgment and social coordination, not just checking the website and booking the first one that's available. So kind of breaking that down, what does the agent do? It monitors this 4UP booking system that uses Rajiv's member login, and it's going to check between certain times. It's going to scrape for new availability that isn't public. Then it's going to evaluate those opportunities. Does it actually qualify within his specific parameters? So, it would send like a prompt to GPT-4, evaluate these tee times. Does it happen before 8:30 a.m. start? Is it under a specific amount of member pricing? Does it have a minimum of 2 players or 4 players? I mean, we haven't done this bit yet, but I'm also thinking like, would it bring in the weather? So is there a rain forecast?
That's a really important thing when you're playing golf. You're out there in the
super
element.
important. So we'll eventually evolve this to add in additional parameters. But then that prompt is going to then return only the qualifying options. And then I think the part that's really cool is the social part, right? So once a good tee time appears, it's going to immediately send personalized emails or personal messages to WhatsApp to Rajiv's golf contact list, the people he wants to spend time with golfing, not just your entire contact list of everyone who could. So, and then also it doesn't have to send just a generic want to play golf, but actually can send something like, hey, Manesh, I spotted a 8 a.m. slot this Saturday, at my member rate. I know you wanted to work on your short game. Are you interested? To use a very specific example.
Kyle, you're going to end up productizing this.
Oh my God, I hope so. I love this. I love stuff like this. And then lastly, just to kind of bring it all home, once enough people respond positively, it's going to book that tea time and send out confirmation details to everyone with like a calendar. So everyone has it in their calendar so they know to go.
I love this. I love this so much. It's so good.
It's a fairly complicated process, especially once you start adding in the social coordination. But again, that's where a lot of these tools really help you build all those kind of steps and automations. And then again, the AI agent component is all about personalization and context, making sure that as tea times become available and then also go away, and as people are responding yes, you start to book based on that. And the nice thing is it all just ends up with a calendar invite that, hey, we're playing golf this Saturday at 8 a.m.
I love it. I love the social element. I just think it's such a cool, interesting use of an agent. And again, it's super low stakes, but actually it's going to make a measurable difference to his life because it's going to save him a lot of time, and it's a really fun one, and it means that he's seeing people in real life. I think there's a lot of concern about AI
Mm-hmm.
taking over everything. No, he's actually using the AI to arrange real world meetups, which I just think is a really fun thing to do.
And I think what's interesting, to bring it back around, because we promised we would. So what's interesting for, a business is, this same pattern works for any time sensitive group coordination. You could build this for coordinating, client events, for booking conference rooms when teams across different organizations need to meet. Team dinners when everyone's in the same city. I can see a great example where you're trying to meet with the client at a specific restaurant, and maybe that's a really popular restaurant. It's difficult to actually book that meeting and find out like from the client's schedules who works. I mean, that's a pretty complicated process that would take a person a lot of time to do. So this can be really relevant to your business around kind of that coordination aspect.
I love it. I love it. But actually, I think this is an important question. What about when it gets the social dynamics wrong? Like, what would happen if it invited it to your, or, if you sent an invite to your entire list rather than just that golf specific list?
Yeah, so that's why we recommend you start conservatively. So start building and add on complexity as you go. Initially, when I started looking at the flow, I only wanted it to monitor tea times and then send Raj an alert. Then you start to add the friend outreach component. And when testing, I was the only one on the list, making sure that I'm the only one getting that ping, hey, do you want to play golf kind of thing. And then after...
It's clearly selfish, right?
A little bit. We're in different time zones, but that's definitely a selfish bit to try to hang out with my friend more often. But then as you add on, different components and you see that it's working successfully, then you can kind of widen it to, the larger group. But I think the biggest lesson here is how do you maintain the personal touch? So
you're a very kind friend to have built this for him, and you're dealing with a whole bunch of things with authentication, data evaluation, social coordination, automated booking. And, those are all exactly the same challenges that you would face building a business agent. But if it messes up, you're just missing a golf game instead of losing a client. So, it's not the world's most urgent thing, but it's a really cool application and it's really fun.
Yep. So to sum up, again, this is start small. So start with just the monitoring and the alerts. Add in the coordination layer once you understand the social dynamics and you've tested it out on a very small audience or use case. And then gradually increase the automation and the personalization as you build confidence in the system. I think the beautiful thing about our Fun-Gents is they let you learn agent building without the pressure of business critical applications and, potentially the brand risk with a client or, a much larger audience. But the skills transfer directly to your business and to your use cases once you've, scaled up and tried them.
Love it. Okay, I think that we have talked enough about agents. I think we've given some really fun, good examples.
All right. Well, let's talk about some AI news.
We have our friends over at Anthropic. They've had a good week.
Yeah. Good legal victory for them. They just won a major fair use victory in a lawsuit about training AI models on copyrighted content. So again, This might sound like big tech drama, but I think it has real implications for how all of us, and all of you listening can use AI tools.
Right, because this case actually helps clarify that AI companies can legally train their models on publicly available content, which has been a big question mark over that since these LLMs started to come into the public space. So it means that the tools we're using are on more solid legal ground. So that might be a little more reassuring about any business that's worried about liability when you're using AI for content creation or analysis. There's obviously still some questions from the creative side about the
Mm-hmm.
ethics of using it. And I think, the ethics of AI is something that we're going to get into. But for now, from a legal perspective, it's a big victory for Anthropic.
Yeah, we should mention, though, that the broader copyright landscape is still pretty unsettled. We've talked about quite a few of the cases that are ongoing against OpenAI. There's cases against Stability AI, from publishers, artists, record labels. There's still a lot, right? The New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI is still pending. And then for Stability AI and Midjourney, there's still a big class action lawsuit from, visual artists.
Yeah, I think that Disney and Universal lawsuit against Midjourney is going to be a really big one. That'll be a very interesting one to see what happens with that. But, it's also not just happening in the US. Like over here in Europe, the EU is developing its own AI regulations, and there's other legal challenges that are happening globally. So while the Anthropic ruling is positive for them, the overall legal framework is still evolving pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think the practical takeaway here is to stay informed. The AI tools we rely on they're not going to suddenly disappear, but it is worth being thoughtful about how you use AI for content creation, especially if you're in creative industries, but also for business owners who are using AI maybe to create logos or create copy and content for social posts.
Absolutely. And always review the terms of services for the AI tools you're using. Most of them have clauses about commercial use and liability that are worth understanding before you integrate them too deeply into your business processes. But also, that's just the same for any tool. If you use Canva for your visual creation, you have to be aware that some of the Canva stuff you can't use commercially. So just generally good business practice. Okay, so it is now time for our AI Gone Wrong segment. This is a great one. There is a startup called Cluely that's getting absolutely roasted on social media for promising to help users cheat on everything from job interviews to exams to sales calls.
And here's the kicker. They just raised $15 million from Andreessen Horowitz, which is a very, well-known and popular venture capital firm. So that has people even more upset. I think the really weird part is that Cluely actually bans users from using their product to cheat on tests or interviews in their terms of service. So they're marketing one thing that you should cheat, but legally forbidding it in another.
I think it's classic rage bait, right? Like they're getting attention by being controversial. They're getting people to talk about them, but the actual product is just another AI assistant that sits on your computer and helps with tasks. It's not really doing anything groundbreaking. They just have a great marketing team.
Which is frustrating that, you're using this kind of rage bait to get people interested in it. Or maybe we call it the AI washing that tool. Because you just have an AI that can see your screen and listen to your calls, similar to other, meeting note takers and AI assistants. But by positioning it as cheating, they've created this viral marketing moment.
Yeah, totally. And, it really shows how these viral marketing moments are causing VCs to be attracted to founders who break the social norms, even if the underlying product isn't that compelling. Controversy gets attention, their name is out there in the public space, but it just doesn't necessarily build a sustainable business, which is frustrating to see from the outside.
Honesty and transparency is really important. So, for us and our listeners, I think it's really important to be thoughtful about how you position, how you're using AI and, the AI tools in your business. There's a big difference between using AI to enhance your capabilities versus, trying to deceive people. So if you focus on value creation, not shortcuts, that won't damage your reputation. Yeah.
Okay, so we're reaching the end. Let's give our listeners some quick wins that they can implement this week. Kyle, what would you say the easiest AI agent win is for someone who's just starting out?
So all the tools that you use, whether it's Gmail for your emails or Slack for, your internal communications, they'll have some sort of agent or automation tool. So start to explore those and see if you can automate one task this week. For example, instead of just auto responding to customer emails, set up an agent that can read the content, categorize the inquiry, and then route it to the right person within the business with some of that context to summarize the email and provide that kind of write up for the person.
And my top tip is just like I did with my Slack to Airtable integration for my newsletter links, just start with the task that you hate the most. Now I have the agent that handles all of that for me, and it really saves hours every week. But I also think, as we talked about when we were going through the examples, just start keeping track of what you do every week and just start to identify the places that could be automated, the things that you hate doing. All of that will really help you start to refine what an agent could help you with.
And I would say don't try to chase perfection. If the agent can handle a task at 70, 80, 90% of your quality level, 90 would be great, but even 70% of your quality level with minimal tweaking, it's worth automating.
Like we've been saying, the key is to start internal or to start really low stakes, like with the Fun-Gent. Start simple and then scale it gradually and add to it over time. You don't need to automate your entire business in week one. That's where it's all going to go wrong. And that's where you start to get projects that you'll end up abandoning because they weren't set up properly in the first place.
So if you take one thing from today's episode, let it be this. AI agents aren't futuristic sci-fi. They're practical tools that businesses are using right now to compete with large enterprise.
The businesses that are winning are starting with simple internal automations and gradually building into more sophisticated agents. And they're not waiting for it to be perfect. They're using what's available today to actually solve problems. So we want to hear about your automation wins or your agent wins. Make sure to email us at hello@earlyadopter.ai. Remember, there's no E in the adopter. Or follow us on social media at early_adopter on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all your favorite social media platforms. And we might feature your story in a future episode. We love hearing from our users and we want to be able to share inspiration to all of our listeners.
So thanks for listening to Early Adopter, where we help make AI your unfair advantage. Until next time, remember, you don't need to automate everything. You just need to automate the right things.
And keep innovating, stay curious, and we will see you next week.
See you next week, Jess.
Bye.